Welcome to the web of tomorrow.
You sounded tired.
I know, at the end there, I did get a little tired. Welcome to the web of tomorrow. Welcome to the web of tomorrow. Today we're going to be talking about GitHub. We're your hosts, Riley Carrasquillo and
Adam Harris. So, did you know that GitHub is actually probably my favorite social network right now?
That's awesome. Makes sense.
Yeah, like I go on there, follow interesting people, and then see the kind of repositories they create and what. Maybe we should get wait for all that. I'm throwing in a lot of technical lingo already. Let's talk about what is Git and GitHub.
We need to have like a section every like once in a while where like there's like this British woman's voice, because it's like the ideal voice, right, typically, and she comes in and she goes repository and then just says like the definition.
Yeah.
That would be really funny. Okay, so Git is the saving tool. That's kind of how I see it. Like, it's the way that you can save procedurally, really. You can procedurally save your project, whatever it is you're working on.
Yeah. It's also kind of like a time capsule, or it's kind of similar to Time Machine, where you can go back in time and see how your project has changed over time.
Right. And so it makes use of the terminal, or what's the Windows one again?
Command line.
Command line. I always draw a blank on that. Uses terminal or command line, and it's so you just throw in some commands. So one of the most typical ones that you'll see is once you start off your project, you'll say git init, and it's that easy. And then
Init.
It's git init. So it's GIT, then space INIT, and you have now made your project into a Git repository.
Yeah. And a repository is just a folder that contains files that actually has like a little hidden Git file that contains all the information about the history of that repository.
Yeah. And in this case, what's really cool about Git, and this is what Adam was touching on, is that, so say you save something and later down the line you realize, well, you exit out of your project, you're past your undos and redos, and you decide, oh, I really didn't like that change that I made. Well, you can actually get into your repository, or your, I guess, cache of saves, and access that to replace whatever changes you had made currently. Or if you want to, you decide, oh yeah, actually, I really didn't like what I had done previously. Let's get back to what I'd done after. You can get back to that. So it's kind of like, it's like a timeline of saves, and you can actually access that timeline anytime you want.
Yeah, and speaking of timeline, you can actually have multiple timelines, right?
Yeah.
It's called a branch. So you create a branch and you name it something else, like my experimental feature, and then you can work and make commits in that branch without messing anything up in your main branch. And if you decide you don't like it, you can just throw that branch away later.
Yeah, it's super cool. I think it's really cool because it's actually I've seen it used in several other different types of applications. And so, for example, at the D3 meetup, I had never really thought about it this way, but it's a great way to teach people that don't know a lot about maybe that particular library, or like you're diving into some really complicated things and you just want to teach them a few things really quick.
Yeah.
And then you want to move on to and fill your code up with like more complicated code. Then you can go access the next step, and it's really good for teaching people, actually.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of tutorials or books that use that. They say, okay, for this chapter, you can check out the chapter 2 branch and see all the code at this point.
And then that kind of leads into GitHub, because Git and GitHub are actually not technically the same thing, but GitHub is kind of The best way I've heard it described to me is that it's kind of like a Dropbox for developers. That's like the most direct way of explaining it. It's something that, unless you make it private, anyone can access, anyone can what we call clone, and then you can see their code, you can manipulate their code, you can use their code if you want to in some cases, and it's a really cool site, a really cool application.
Yeah, it's really really nicely done, and I put up all my side projects and stuff on GitHub. They're all publicly available, and then it's kind of a nice backup too. They're all kind of backed up in the cloud that way.
Right, yeah, and that's probably what it's one of the big ways it's used is for backup and collaboration,
Yeah.
accessing, like if you have, and this, I think actually we talked a little bit about this in a previous episode, but we talked about how like it's useful in that if I'm working with you on something and I make a few changes on the code, I send it to you and then you approve it and then you accept it into the repository.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you can have different levels of access. I can make Riley a collaborator, like I've done on this one project, and you can directly make changes without my approval. But on any project you find on GitHub, you can go and fork it, and that creates your own version of that code. And then when you make changes, you can make what's called a pull request to the original owner, and they can review it and merge that into their code.
And that's a good way of avoiding bugs. Doing some bug management. Because if I'm just like constantly saving things to the thing and then you're saving things to the project and we just don't really know who's doing what, then there's typically going to be some issues. Because even though there are style guides, which we haven't even talked about either, but style guides are a formulated way of programming or coding and kind of like what the accepted way for that organization. So for example, Domo I'm sure has like a style guide of some sort.
Yeah.
Where
to put the curly braces and stuff like that.
Right. And Google for sure has a style guide. You can actually upload it from GitHub if you want to.
Nice. Yeah, Airbnb has a really popular style guide up on GitHub.
Oh, really?
It's actually
Airbnb?
It's trending right now on GitHub.
Huh. And you can actually see trendy stuff on GitHub.
Yeah, if you go to github.com/trending, then you can see what all the top most interesting projects right now that a lot of people are starring, which is just like favoriting it. And you can even click languages on the side. So if you just click JavaScript, you can see the most popular JavaScript projects.
And that's one of the like big ways it's really social. I mean, obviously you can put up your information and your picture and stuff like that, but.
And if you follow somebody, you see the things that they're starring in the project that they're creating. Yeah,
that's super cool. I've got 2 stars on mine.
Nice.
Some people have like thousands and thousands of stars.
Yeah, I've got a couple projects that have some stars from random people. I got one that got up to 80, and then I just couldn't keep working on it anymore.
One of the big ones that I saw was a guy had created a guide for I want to say arrays, and just kind of understanding arrays and how useful they are and different use cases of arrays.
Yeah.
And he got 1,000 or so, and he just posted on LinkedIn. So it's really integrated into a lot of different things. People will bring it up in Stack Overflow, which is something that we'll mention in our next episode. And then they'll post it on their social media sites like Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, so that they can show off their projects. It's just a really great way. It's just a really great example of how developers in general are very open source.
Yeah, so I've seen other interesting examples of things you can do on GitHub besides code. So one of them is, like an article, like you said. Another thing that's very popular right now is having a list of things. And all you do is you put up a repository with a readme.md, and that's a markdown file like we talked about last time, and then just list out a bunch of things related to some topic. Another thing I've seen is a repo called whatever your username is /AMA, and AMA just stands for Ask Me Anything.
Yeah.
So like some developers put up an AMA repo, and people put in an issue, which is usually used for feature requests and bug reports, but they use issues to ask that developer questions.
A really great example of when I've used it was on my little personal website. I wanted to do kind of a opaque, shadowy type design for my name, and so I found this one that was better than anything I really could do really fast. You know, I would have had to really tweak it and do some research. So I did what we call forking. I forked it, which basically makes a copy into your collection of repositories, and then I cloned it, and then which means that I took it off the repository and actually put it into my computer and was able to manipulate it, access it, play with it, and then I was able to do get this short snippet of code that, you know, ultimately made my page look a little bit better.
Cool. And then another thing I've seen used on GitHub is as a way to write a book. You can write a book open source and even have people contribute to it and say fix typos and stuff like that. So there's this one called You Don't Know JS. And it's mostly available right now in printed form, but it's like the last part is still being written on GitHub. And I actually fixed a typo on that one.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, if it's open and it's not private, and you can make it private, I think you have to pay. But if it's public, then anyone can go in there and make suggestions. You can get pull requests for fixing typos or fixing bugs, or you can say, hey, I'm having a really big issue with this function that I'm trying to fill out. Does anyone know that could help me? And then they'll throw you some stuff, and it's really cool. It's just a super collaborative tool.
Everyone seems to be really friendly on GitHub. If you ask a question like this doesn't seem to be working for me, people will help out.
Yeah, and that's another example of why I love the developer world, because people remember when they were in that situation. Yeah. And they're always trying to help out.
So let's just mention some resources for getting started with Git.
Okay. One that I used to just get me kind of initiated into the whole GitHub world is try.github.io. So if you just go into Google and put try Git, it'll be your top result typically. Yeah. And it's a lot like your typical code school, code academy type class, although it is code school. It will just run you through, and you'll type in the browser.
Super easy. One of the steps is to create a GitHub account, and you go through the process and you actually create a little example repo.
Exactamundo.
And it's free.
And then a more in-depth one is...
it's the Pro Git book, but you can access that on git-scm.com. You can click on documentation. It's got some great getting started stuff and some basics of how Git and version control work.
And that will be a great resource for you for when you start actually using Git. And I use it all the time to help me.
Yeah, it's got some more advanced stuff in there. A lot of times I'll search some Git topic and it takes me to this website.
And for the most part, you will typically end up using like 5 or 6 commands regularly. Yeah. But if you want to get in deeper, there is a lot of functionality and use for the more advanced stuff.
Yep.
So, since we mentioned this at the beginning of our webisode. Whoa. We're moving on to the next thing every time. So for our next webisode, we're going to talk about some really great resources that we both personally like and that we use to help us when we have questions. And as you can imagine, with web development, there are a ton of web
resources.
Resources. So we'll see you next time on the Web of Tomorrow.